Let's do this.
Imperial Lounge presents an icon.
Reggae dancehall by the beach. To be held at Imperial Lounge, 2 to 14 High Street, Margate Seafront, Kent, CT9, 180. To be held on the first Saturday of each month. Your host DJ Matt. Also rotating DJs, Ruddy Boone, DJ Happy,
and Younger General.
Doors open 8 p.m. till late. Free entry all night. Music policy, reggae, dancehall, and a touch of soul. On the first Saturday of each month. Reggae dancehall by the beach. At the Imperial Lounge Margate. Do remember you can also get VIP and Shisha booking. More info on the World Jam Global website. That's www.worldjamglobal.com. Also www.imperialloungemargate.co.uk.
See you there.
Can't use them, it's the right thing you doing. Rebellious like Malcolm. 1, 2, 3, swing it.
Do you have an old sound tape or your favorite cassette tape that you want converted to CD or MP3 format? Do you need a demo CD, radio ad, a DJ or even a sound system for your wedding, birthday or special occasion? Then why not get in contact with KTR Records on 07931 152 448 or check out our website on www.ktrrecords.com. We have been in business since 2004 and also undertake community projects. So for your remixes, dubplates and all your sound editing needs, why not contact KTR Records, official sponsor of World Jam Global Radio. KTR Records, coming your way. Do you like music like this?
Great music all the time.
Or like this?
The music you love.
Maybe this.
Great music that makes you want to turn up the volume loud.
Or life track like this.
Especially where human life is concerned. Surely, sooner or later, people will realize that lives actually matter.
Then you're in the right place. Keep it locked to World Jam Global, where music is harmony.
Music 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, you're my World Jam. Hotter than them.
See live schedule.
You see it, it's here. You see it. New feature coming from World Jam Global Radio in 2018. World Jam Global Top 10. To vote for your favorite artist, go to twitter.com/World Jam Global or facebook.com/World Jam Global. So pick the right track where you want to have in your car, at your house, a rock. At them.
Forgive me, just give me a little while.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Yo, with Kevin Julian on another edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
Did my time.
We are live with another exclusive interview.
I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime. Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school.
The live stream is going up now. Share.
Beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. did my time. I paid for my crime. I was a drug dealer, sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent, I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now I'll sit back and think it over since I've gotten older. The life I used to live, I wouldn't do it again. I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
Already did my time, paid for my crime.
Now I want to say a big good evening going out to each and every single one of you who are tuning in from all parts of the world. Tonight we're going to be talking to
Paid for my crime.
David Phillips, Erica Casey Traverso, and Cat Lee. David is the father of Desmond Phillips.
Already did my time.
Cat and Erica are advocates for justice for Desmond.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back.
As we said in the promo, Desmond Phillips, a young man with everything to live for, struggling with mental health, needed help. His father called for help, and what happened next will bring you to your knees.
There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands.
When you hear this story,
I was swimming in women.
when you hear this father's pain,
I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed.
you will understand why there's such an outcry and an outpour of rage
Gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster.
across the cities of the United States of America.
Trying to cope.
This is not the first time we're hearing of a young life taken
I paid for
at the hands of trigger-happy cops
already did
with
my
very little, if any, understanding of how to challenge or manage mental health.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
I think it's important that you share this stream, this live stream. We have a few minutes left before we go live.
Sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's
We're coming back to this city
I had to repent.
next week where I speak to another friend of David Phillips,
Shit.
Scott Russian, who lost his son also in a very similar
To live, I wouldn't do it.
circumstance.
Young and dumb, my brain was so numb.
Part 1 and Part 2.
But I was nobody.
This is Part 1.
Billy the Kid had a lot in common.
So stand by a full exclusive interview.
Schwarzenegger, I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters. Already did my time, paid for my crime. Already did my time, already did my time. I paid for my crime, already did my time.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
Don't forget you can add your comments in the comment page. Catch us on www.worldjamglobalradio.com. That's our website. Get us on Facebook Live
With this living here,
and all other groups associated with police brutality.
trying to cope with this living here. Yes I am, yes I am, yes I am, yes I am, yes I am. Trying to cope with this living here.
Please share this stream with all your friends,
This living here.
with all the groups that you're involved with. Let's get this message out worldwide.
I paid for my crime.
Very shortly I'm going live
Father who art in heaven,
to David Phillips,
hallowed be thy name.
Erica and Catley.
Thy will be done
Stand by.
on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime, pay for my crime. Pay for my crime. All those drive-by killings, stop them.
Get yourselves a hot cup of coffee,
About nothing.
cup of tea, or whatever you're going to do. Get ready to kick back.
He who was out sin, let him cast the first stone. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary
After the introduction from David Phillips, we're going to be hearing a detailed account
statewide
from the advocates of Justice for Desmond.
Knives, stop stabbing.
Stand by.
Yeah.
So let's just go live right across the waters. And first of all, let's just introduce Erica Castor-Traverso. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, Erica.
Good morning, Kervin. Yes,
you,
it's morning over here.
Thank you very much. If you just introduce yourself to the audience, tell them a little bit about yourself and how you come to be involved in Justice for Desmond.
Yeah, I am a college English teacher at Butte College here in Chico, and I've been pretty aware of the excessive force and police brutality issues in our country for a long time, including in Chico, because my kids grew up here and they had a lot of friends who were harassed by the police in this town. But the day after Desmond was killed, I did something I never do, which is I looked at the news, the local news, and there he was. They hadn't put a picture of him yet, but and my heart just broke. I don't even know. I can't tell you exactly what happened in me, except to know that I knew I had to do something about this. It was, this is my hometown. I was so angry and so brokenhearted. I have sons that at the time, I have a son that was exactly the same age at the time Desmond was killed, and a son-in-law who is a young black man here in Chico who was also the same age. So it really hit home with me. I went to a candlelight vigil. I learned more, and the more I learned, the more I had to get involved. It's just too personal.
Sometimes you just feel compelled to move, to do something when something is just so close to home, right?
Yes, and I'm kind of a couch activist. I do a lot of posting on Facebook, or I used to, but the next thing I know, 18 months later, I'm finding myself kind of on the front lines physically and emotionally, and I can't stop myself from doing it. It's just I am compelled because what happened was so completely horrific and unjust. And this town is accepting it. Too many people in this town are accepting it, but things are changing. There's more people becoming aware and questioning.
And hopefully, as we begin to unravel this story here on this show today, maybe more people will get to hear about it and get involved, and you'll get the support that you need. Okay, thank you very much, definitely. Erica. Let's introduce Kat. Kat Lee, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you very much, Kat. If you'd also like to just do a little intro about yourself, who you are, where you are, and why you're involved with the Justice for Desmond campaign.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Kat Lee, and I've recently become a member of the Justice for Desmond Phillips team. I'm very honored and privileged to work amongst such strong, dedicated organizers, activists, professors, teachers, mothers here in the community that have the same passion as I have for social justice. I fight for Black lives. I am a social work major, and Desmond Phillips did suffer from mental illness, similar to my sister, who was 12 years younger than me, who also lives in the city of Chico and suffers from mental illness. And my family calls the police all the time. And when Desmond was murdered, and I found out that it was at the hands of the police due to a call for mental illness, I knew I needed to do something. I knew my family needed to do something differently. We need alternatives to policing. So that is why I fight for Desmond.
Wow. Just to hear you and Erica at the moment, I'm really moved, because we've done a whole series of shows over the 4 years. And this thing about mental health comes up over and over and over again. Last week we did one with an army veteran, Captain Brian Babb, who had served his country twice, gone out to Afghanistan, etc., done 2 tours, and had suffered with mental health. And when we hear the story from his sister of how he was handled and treated by the police and then victimized, because then they obviously try to categorize him as some sort of a criminal, someone that had to be put down almost like a rabid dog, so to speak. It's frightening to hear some of the stories that are coming out of America, and to think that that the police have yet to find an alternative way, or the government have yet to find an alternative way of dealing or responding to people with mental health. It's quite shocking. But we're going to get to that very shortly. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was just going to say that's what happened to Desmond, that they've tried to vilify him. And one of the things that we do is tell people who he really was.
Okay, well, whatever's going on where you guys are, we're getting that echo back again, whether people are jumping into rooms or turning stuff on. Let's just be mindful of that. And anyhow, lastly, let's introduce the father of Desmond Phillips, Mr. David Phillips. And before I introduce David, I just want people to understand that David is not going to stay on the call for long, because there's still parts of this that he finds difficult to come to terms with. It's still emotionally raw with him, and there's things that he does not want to revisit and hear again. So we're going to do a little bit with David, and then he may disappear and he may come back. But for want of a better word, we have David's blessing to go ahead and do this show, and Erica and Kat have all the details that we need. But David is going to do the introduction. He's going to tell us about Desmond, what Desmond was like as a son, from a father's point of view, and take us to a point before we reintroduce Erica and Kat. Good morning. It's evening here in the UK, but it's morning where you are, I believe, David.
Yes.
We're going to need you to be louder, get closer to your device again.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
So if you'd like to just introduce yourself, David, tell the audience who you are, and tell them a little bit about you, then we'll start talking a little bit more about Desmond.
Yeah, I'm David Phillips. I'm Desmond's father. Desmond is Desmond is such a beautiful child. He was so humble, not a violent bone in his body. He traveled the country singing in his church choir. Desmond suffered from PTSD, which were known to the 5 cops that shot him. 2 of them had been to our house on 2 separate occasions. Desmond was petrified of the police. He was scared of the police. It started in Sacramento. He was 24 years old. He was praying by the light rail. They jumped on him. The police beat him and put him in ICU for 4 days. I moved him to Chico. 7-8 months later, what happened? The cops came in and they murdered him. And he it's so sad because Desmond loved the cops that murdered him. They just didn't know it. This kid loved everybody. He started a feeding program here in Chico. He immediately got into our church. Like I said, he was a very, very, very religious child. He loved God like no other. Amen. No criminal record, nothing. He's just a beautiful child, very humble.
It's important that you emphasize that, David. It's important that you talk to us about who Desmond was. It's important that you tell the audience that Desmond had no criminal convictions. He had no history of criminal activity or arrests or jail time. He had no acts of violence. Tell us about him. What sort of a child was he?
None of that. Desmond was so humble, and Desmond, I mean, even on video games, they got video games out now that, you have to shoot people on video games. He couldn't even do that when he got to the park. Desmond would give you the shirt off of his back. Desmond never had any run-ins with the police, ever. He didn't even have a parking ticket. And, they try to paint a picture like he's he was some criminal or some drug dealer. I mean, it's so vicious. They've already murdered my child, but then for them to say stuff like that, it just adds, it adds to the pain and the fury. But Desmond Phillips, again, he traveled the country singing in his church choir. After Desmond was murdered, I cleaned out his car, and I got a total of 7 Bibles, even a little bitty pamphlet Bibles. He would read for hours and hours and hours on and on that Bible, the Bible. Such a beautiful kid. He planned on going to Chico State. Him and his nephew, my grandson, just turned 18. They were going to take classes at Chico State. They cut that short. Desmond came here to Chico and moved with me after he was beaten by Sacramento Police Department. Again, no CIT training or none of that with these cops. They're just too trigger happy and just too quick to just jump and beat and this and that. But Desmond came here. He didn't get not 1, not 2. He had 3 jobs. Desmond held down 3 jobs. Desmond, could you imagine, just try to imagine what this kid went through. He's in the middle of a mental crisis. And the very people that he is petrified from, that he's scared of, kick in the door, no warning, no knock on the door saying Chico police, open it, none of that. The door flies open, they tased him, and they shot my baby over 16 times. In the face, the mouth, the nose, multiple gunshot wounds to the head. This kid, they did what they wanted to do, and that was murder, and they did it in front of me. I seen them shoot my son when he was down. Desmond didn't deserve that. Desmond would give you the shirt off his back. And to be murdered in your own home, when they get comfortable about kicking in your door where you live in your own home with no say-so and just murder you in there, something needs to change. Something really needs to change. Desmond is a beautiful child. It doesn't get easier for me. It doesn't, man. You know?
I'm hearing your pain. I'm hearing your pain, David. David, can you just take us back to that day and talk us through what was going on that day before the police arrived?
Well, Desmond was in the early stage of his mental crisis, and I was recognizing the sign, so I called the ambulance to come and take my son, and which they've done 3 or 4 times before. They've been to my house. They were aware of his PTSD. To take him to the hospital, which they've done in the past, and to get him some medication and get him some help. The hospital misdiagnosed him. They failed him. But at any rate, this day I called the ambulance and I asked them to come and assist me with my baby, to take him to the hospital, get some medication. But it was all different. They came, the ambulance came, and then the fire department came, and they did something that you don't ever do with someone with PTSD. Is you go right to him, you take away. He had a pair of headphones and his sunglasses on, and he was dancing and singing to the music. He was into his little crisis. They came in, they took his glasses off, they took his headphones off, and then they tried to grab him by the arm, and that's when he backed away. They left outside, and they started talking about calling Chico police. Desmond heard this. Desmond locked the door, and Desmond armed himself with a knife. I called them and I told them that. I said my son had armed himself with a knife because he heard the fire department and the ambulance calling the police. No one was in danger when they came. Desmond was walking around the apartment, and next thing, the door comes flying open. Again, like I said, they did not knock on the door saying, "Oh, Chico police, open the door." None of that. No de-escalation attempt whatsoever. The only thing that happened was that front door came flying open. Desmond was tased. 2 to 3 seconds right after the taser, multiple gunshot wounds. They shot my baby over 16 times. And then they painted a picture like he grabbed a door jamb from the door that they kicked in, which was totally false. and swung at him. Desmond is 6'1". Every bullet that Desmond took was in the face, the mouth, the head, one in the arm, and multiple to the chest, multiple to the head. Again, Desmond is 6'1". If Desmond had got up like they claimed and swung at them with a knife, Desmond would have been hit in his midsection, because every bullet hole in my apartment is 3 feet, and there's a couple that are 1 foot, 2 feet. And I saw them shooting my son. This is the thing. They didn't expect me to come out of the room, but I witnessed, and that's the hardest thing a parent could ever go through, is to see their child being murdered. And that's what they did. They shot that baby when he was down. I seen an officer put at least 8 rounds into my son when he was down. And you know, we presented facts. The coroner office said that the shooter had to be standing over the victim when they were shooting, which I told them I seen him shooting my son when he was down. Then they lied about the officers having CIT training. Then we had the captain that teach the class called him a lie, straight out called him a lie, because they have not participated in his class, his CIT training out at Butte College since 2013. And only a couple of them came then. So that was totally a lie as well. But again, that day, it was straight up an execution. It was straight up murder. And yes, his race, he was a young black kid. That played a big factor in it, because these are some racist cops. Here, I mean, there's been over 30-something murders in this county, and every last one of them has been justified. They, you know, and again, when they can just kick in your front door and then murder you in your own home, you're not even safe in your own home. When you call for help, you expect to get help. It's called, you know, they're supposed to protect and serve, not seek and destroy. And they're killing us. They are murdering us. And then they say nothing's wrong with that. Well, you know what? I seen my child being murdered. And you know what? That's the worst thing any parent could ever go through. Ever.
Wow. You know, here's the thing, David. When the police kicked in your front door, was you still inside? Was you inside or was you outside?
I was inside. My 2 grandchildren were inside.
So the police
they shot up.
Yeah,
they shot both.
Yeah, one second, David. 1 second. Let's just get a real understanding of this before we bring the girls in. So
Okay.
the police have arrived on the premises where someone is supposed to be in possession of a knife, and they've locked themselves in a room. Was the police aware that you were in the house and there were others in the house?
They were. Yes, I was on the phone with them.
Okay,
they
so
were aware that I was.
yeah. So they've entered in without making sure that you're safe or the grandchildren are in a safe place.
Oh. They knew we were safe. I was on the phone with dispatch. I was in my room, locked in my room. My other 2 grandchildren were locked in their room. My son got in the other room with the grandchildren. He came in there, and then he shut the door back. And he went back in the living room. He was all quiet. Everything was quiet. We were safe. We were safe. And if the police wanted, if they were so concerned about our safety, they would have got us out of the window. There was plenty of access to get us out of the window. Now, this is interesting as well, is that there were 7 witnesses, me and my 2 grandchildren, as well as 4 different neighbors. They told one of my neighbors that her yard connects to my backyard. They were going through her, passing through her yard, and leaned in her window and told her to stay inside and stay down. That's before they even went in. These are the ones that came in the back. Now, my other witnesses, which were right next to me in the front, he told me that they were all there. They had their guns drawn. And again, this is before they came in. And again, like I said, there was no communication whatsoever. The door came flying open. They tased Desmond. Desmond screeched, hollered, and like I said, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, they opened fire from every direction, from the back and the front. He had nowhere to go, nowhere. When I crawled to my son, I seen my son. I knew my son was dead before he hit the floor. And when I crawled to my son didn't have anything, nothing in his hand. And then they tried to say, oh, he dropped the knife and he grabbed a door jamb. How in the heck can you do that in such short time, which is total lie? They said that the taser didn't work. I took pictures of my son. They took my son's body to the next town and hid him, gave us the runaround. We had to go, and he would send me to all these different funeral homes. This is the district attorney, Mike Ramsey. He would send us to different funeral homes saying my son was there. So we had to go through that for a week. When we find, and the only way we got my son, the whereabouts of my son, is the funeral home from Sacramento, had to call down to Chico. And that's the only way that my son's body was released. And they gave them hell about releasing my son's body. What he did, he took my son's body to the next town. And he hid and get this, the district attorney's name is Mike Ramsey here in Butte County. He took my son's body to Ramsey. Yeah, that's right, Ramsey Funeral. And he hid him. And he gave us the runaround for a week. Little over a week. So on top of that, we have to go through all this. You know, my son was just murdered. And then 5 or 6 hours after my son was murdered, they held a press release saying that the police were justified. Now, he held several more press releases, and every time that the DA held a press release, his story would change. It would change. And you know, he lied so much, but thank God for Erica. Thank God for Rain, Cat, everybody on the Justice for Desmond's team, because God brought this. God brought these beautiful people to us. And God, and you know what? We have a rock solid case on them. But do you think the Attorney General acted on it? No, he didn't. They're hiding behind this law about all the police need to do and say that they feared for their life. Where's the fear when you're standing over someone shooting him? This kid needed medical attention, not to be murdered. Not to be murdered. And that's exactly what they did. And I, as a parent, had to witness that. And I'll be damned, we're going to save more lives here. And you know, Desmond's gone in body, but he's here in spirit. You know, and I know how religious my baby is, and I know that he's with God. That's the only thing that kind of helps. You know what I mean? But does it get easier? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It gets harder with time, because that child should be here. He should be attending Chico State. You know, he didn't have no criminal record, nothing. And they try to paint a picture like he was a drug dealer and he was a gangbanger and he was this, and then they had to eat their words because they checked for any type of criminal record and they could not find none because he had none. Just a beautiful child, man. They destroyed this family is what they did. We're a very close-knit family, and they destroyed it. They destroyed us. And it doesn't get easy.
I can hear you still living the pain, David.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about what was going on that day before the police came? Anything else that you want to add to that?
I just want to add that the DA here, the district attorney here, Mike Ramsey, and the chief of police, O'Brien, this little county is a racist town. It is. And they got police on the force that they know have had racist encountered in high school, and Erica and them can tell you more about that, but they still hire them. You know, these police officers have priors. They have priors in killings, police shootings, and murders. When I stood up there, and I'm gonna get off after this, but when I stood up, when this happened to Desmond last year, and I begged people, I said, you know what, you guys, we need to come out as a community, because if we don't, I'm not going to be the only one standing up here. I'll be damned. Two of the 5 cops, 2 of them No, actually, 3 of them were involved in the murder of Tyler Rushing 4 months later. Again, they kicked the door on him. And I'm sure Scott will tell you all about that as well. But, you know, we have all became friends. But why? Because of our children and our loved ones have been murdered. You know, they've been murdered by the police. And the police here, you know, we got to send a message because they're promoting murder. The DA and the chief of police, to me, are promoting murder. Because when people murder you, kill you, and murder, I mean, there's no way in hell Desmond should be dead. There's no way in hell Myra or Tyler should be dead. You know, 30-something murders in this county, and they're all justified by the DA. Every last one of them.
Well, we're going to hear a bit more about that from the girls, and we're also definitely going to be hearing from Scott Rushing about Tyler. We've got him live on the show next week, so we're going to be getting an update on that. But David, I do thank you for your contribution so far. It must have been a very hard experience watching the police execute your son the way that they did.
It is.
And finding yourself helpless.
Yeah, it's even harder that I'm still in the apartment where my son was murdered, and I refuse to leave until I can get an investigation going, you know, in case they need to come in and take measurements and this and that. Because, again, when I told them that I seen them shooting my son when he was down, we got bullet holes in my apartment, in my toolbox, that are a foot high from the ground. But yes, thank you for having me on.
Those bullet holes in the wall or wherever that are a foot high represent the fact that Desmond Phillips could not have been stood up confronting the police officers who were claiming that they were in fear of their lives when they opened fire on him. That 1 foot high bullet hole suggests that the victim, because he was the victim, he wasn't the assailant, he was the victim, would have been on the ground or very, very near to the ground.
Exactly.
Which puts him in a prostrate position.
I saw them do this on top of that, and that, you know, it just goes with what I was telling them all along. One more quick thing, Kermit. They even broke into my neighbor's apartment next door this is how wildly they shot up the apartment because, again, my 2 grandchildren were in that apartment when all this went down. They broke into my neighbor's apartment to retrieve bullets.
Wow.
See, and my neighbor, they didn't have a search warrant. My neighbor did not give them any permission. My neighbor wrote out statements saying, hey, these guys came in without a search warrant, without permission. They're in there getting evidence, you know, taking them bullets and getting extra bullets out, you know, that went through. They traveled through 3 or 4 walls into the neighbor's house. If they had been home, God, they would have probably been dead as well or hit by a bullet, you know, because from the angle, it was went right to their TV, and one would travel through 2 or 3 walls. But again, they murdered him. They executed him. I seen it. And I will not rest. We will not rest until justice is served.
Amen. David, thank you very much. I'm not sure whether you're going to listen to the rest of the show or not. But at any point, if you really do feel like you want to come back in and you've got something to say, please feel free to do it. It's a platform for you to be able to express your concerns as to how the police handled your son or that particular incident on that particular day. That's now resulted in you having to bury your son in such words fail me. It must hurt. But thank you, David, and thank you for sharing that time with us. I want to skip across to Erica. When you hear David share this impassioned experience, if you can call it that, how was that left? How did that? Is that how you came to involve yourself with David and his family?
Yeah. I'm a little at loss for words every time I hear David speak. This happens. I get really lost for words. So let me gather myself up. The first encounters I had with the Phillips family and David was at the Candlelight Vigil and a little gathering we had at the police station. And I heard all this sadness and pain, and I was crying. Everybody was crying. You can't be around them without feeling how much pain they're in. And still, this isn't something that goes away or that you get over. This is something you get through.
Yeah.
So, you just get through it. And I really, when I hear that, and I've heard a lot of it, I've heard this story over and over again from David. It doesn't ever get easier to listen to, because this was a human being. He lived, he breathed, he loved, he was loved. And what they did was so over the top, violent and awful. And in the supposed safety of a living room on top of it. It's pretty hard.
So I guess yourself and Kat, again, we've got this echo. Somebody has come in with this thing going on live, and it really is feeding back, and we're getting it through, and it's going to come out on a recording. So we need to stop that, please. Otherwise, we're going to have a pretty bad recording. But I take it that you and Kat have become pretty good friends since you've got on the Justice for Desmond campaign, right?
Yeah, I think the whole team has, we call ourselves family now, because when you go through something like this, then I think that it transcends other acquaintances and other people you meet. You can't help but become deeply involved in their lives, even if we don't see each other every day or, go out and socialize on a regular basis. We still are intimately connected simply by sharing this experience.
We are hearing so many cases of young kids, who are going through mental health related issues, who are being shot down dead by police. David and his family are not alone in having to go through this battle. Where what we're witnessing is the total lack of resources that are available in response to something that happens to be widespread. Now,
yes,
when you've got something that's widespread, when you've got something that's impacting so many people, I'm not sure what the stats are for your particular community or America nationwide, but I'd imagine that the stats for people with mental health are going to be at somewhere around the 1 in 3, 1 in 6 minimum, which means that a strategy needs to be put in place in order to be able to respond to such things. And I'm just at a loss as to why America, the health service or the government, has not put a strategy in place, to respond to something that's so widespread. So I would imagine this is not just about Desmond Phillips or David Phillips and his family's loss, because that's a great loss and it's tragic, absolutely tragic. But unless change can be made in the way that this issue is responded to, we're going to have 1,000 more Desmond Phillips before the year's out. That's before the year's out.
I know. In 2017, the year that Desmond was killed, there was approximately 1,100. It depends on the Washington Post versus the Guardian, but the Guardians counted 1,100 innocent or not proven guilty yet people shot by the police, and of that percentage, something up in the over 50%, 65%. I don't remember the numbers anymore. Were identified as mental health cases, and so that it is outstanding. And there are options to police departments. The American police just don't take them, and I can tell you why, but it's a long story.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, go in, Kat.
If you guys don't mind.
No.
As far as, mental illness amongst police killings in America is definitely a systemic issue. And we have over 60% of all police killings involve people who are mentally ill. And most of them have a history of mental illness that is known to cops, like in the situation of Desmond Phillips, as we just heard David report. There is a history of oppression and racism here in America that affects all of the racial disparities and disproportion that's going on amongst Black lives. For instance, it is said that 20% of African Americans are more likely to experience mental health illnesses. On top of that, only 1 out of 3 Blacks will actually receive the mental health services that they actually need. There are so many barriers that African Americans are experiencing when it comes to mental illness. There's stigma that plays a big role in not seeking help and not wanting to acknowledge that there's a mental illness that's taken place with the African American child or adult. There's also a distrust in white people who make up majority of the mental health professionals that are available to a lot of Black communities. So there's a lack of diversity. There's also socioeconomic factors that come into play, such as African Americans not having access to affordable health care. We only make up 14% of the population, and yet 30% are living under federal poverty level. So the disproportion and the racial disparity is definitely playing a huge role into what's been taking place with the police killings of Blacks and mentally ill in America.
Wow. It's probably, for here in the UK, we've got a very similar parallel of statistics when it comes to, English, Black Caribbeans, etc., who are suffering a mental health related issue. The only difference is they don't get killed by cops. It's got to be frustrating for you, Kat, who works in the industry and has worked. I do support work for people with mental health related issues, and so does my wife. And we are normally the type of people that would be referred to as first responders if there was an issue. Most people who know what people like us do would call us first. Now, I can't understand why there isn't that resource or accessibility made available at the point of contact where someone is calling in with a mental health related issue. And as David explained, with the issue that Desmond had already had, where he was beaten and hospitalized by police in Sacramento prior to coming to Chico, right? That once he heard or saw police, he was going to freak out in whatever respect. But why aren't they utilizing people who are working with mental health at that point?
Kerwin, that speaks to the cop culture. One of the things to keep in mind, there are programs, the Memphis model from Memphis University is one of them, where they have specialized groups of police officers who have in-depth training, and they are the ones who go on first responding calls. That program is not utilized much in America, and the problem that we have is that our officers are trained to view citizens as enemies. We are no longer in a protect and serve environment, which I think is what your police service is much more prone to. Our police service is militarized, and everybody is an enemy, and the language they use is that of enemies and situations, and they use very tactical military language. But their view of these people who are in crisis is that they are an enemy and a threat, no matter what the situation. And so it is a mindset that's deeply ingrained in our police culture in this country, and is strongly supported by the powers that be because of the amount of power it gives over citizens. If we're afraid of the police, then we're all going to behave and not question and that kind of thing. So it really is a power structure and a mindset that's built into our police force from the top down.
I'd like to add to that.
Come in, Kat.
With that being said, it definitely needs to be a culture change, Erica. I totally agree. Black Lives Matter Sacramento has done excellent work lifting Desmond Phillips' name and fighting for his justice because, as we said, Desmond Phillips was from Sacramento before he moved to Chico, where he was unlawfully murdered. Black Lives Sacramento has a principle of finding alternatives to policing, creating alternatives, building trust within your community, trusting the people, your neighbors, to protect each other and not resort to calling 911. With that being said, we need to tear down from the top and rebuild from the bottom using the community. We have tried to make sure that our community is aware of alternatives to policing when it comes to mental health crisis. We have a team in town called the Crisis Care Advocacy Triage Team. They're 24 hours. They respond to mental health crisis calls. The leader of that team is NAMI certified as well as Memphis Model certified in her training, and she has a team of individuals that work with her. We support her, and we ask everyone in Butte County to please call her first, call Butte County Behavioral Health first, that has mental health professionals, social workers, etc., and try to not have to call 911 for the police. Because as we've seen with Desmond Phillips, and as I've seen with my sister and having to protect her, when Butte County law enforcement shows up, they're ready to shoot to kill.
Yeah, and funny enough, when David tells a story of how the police arrived, it's quite apparent, even as armchair viewers, right, that the motive, the intention, the agenda was to take him out. There was
it was.
There was no mindset to let's go and find out what's going on here and see how we can resolve this. The whole approach was, as you said, Erica, it was a very militarized approach, with what appeared to be a clear agenda to take him out. Is that how you guys see it?
Definitely. The police, the fire and EMTs were on scene for 9 minutes before, or for 5 minutes rather, before they called Chico PD. And Chico PD was only on scene for approximately 9 minutes before they killed Desmond. Everything indicates that they came there to kill him. They, like David mentioned, they told the neighbor to get down. They had locked people away in a perimeter outside. There was no negotiations. The front window was shut with the blinds down. The front door was locked. They did not approach. They had access to the grandchildren and to David through bedroom windows, and they didn't even take that option to get them out safely before they entered the apartment. They did nothing to de-escalate Desmond. And one of the things I want to add is that corruption is so deep in this county that in the official report of the accident call, the murder call, one of the EMTs writes that on several occasions, Chico police called out to Desmond, told him to drop the knife, et cetera, et cetera. But the 911 calls that David made had open mic. You can hear what's going on. And there is absolutely no comments from Chico police toward Desmond until they kicked the door down and then still didn't talk to him. And the other thing to keep in mind is they kicked the door down and it was and tased him. It was less than 5 seconds before he was dead. So that doesn't give you any time for de-escalation at all.
Wow. When we look at the militarized mentality that the American police use in their approach, is their thinking is they're being called out to somebody who's suffering with mental health, but yet their response is as if they're going to deal with a bank robber or a hostage taker,
right,
or a murderer or a rapist or somebody that's violent. So how is this viewed in America?
We're pretty divided on this in this country. There are a lot of people who believe the police can do whatever they want. that they have such a dangerous job. Everything that they do is perfect, and things like that are actually very scary. A couple of details about what happened. So this gives you an idea of the mindset of Chico Police. Two officers that fired at Desmond had been to his apartment previously on a 5150, which is a mental health call, and they were the ones that took him to the hospital. But to do that, they had to carry him out in a wrap because he was throwing his arms around. And a wrap is a big, like blanket-like thing that restraint.
Yep.
And his dreadlocks had fallen out of the top of the wrap and were dragging on the ground, and they were stepping on his dreadlocks and pulling his hair, and didn't notice. And when his sister tried to stop them, they threatened her with arrest. And that's the mentality. They saw Desmond as an inconvenience and a pain in the rear end, and all they wanted to do was like get him, throw him somewhere, lock him up, whatever, as long as he wasn't in their face. And these two officers were also the two that entered the apartment knowing he was in a mental health crisis similar to the one that they had witnessed themselves. And it's important to note also that despite the fact that there were many seasoned officers on scene, they put in two rookies. They sent two rookies into this volatile environment. Gandeman at the time had less than a year on the force, and Fleer had 15 months. And that's who they sent in as the main contact police into this environment. They had every intention of just to him, he was a fly that was irritating them, and they wanted him gone. I have no doubt about that.
I like to add to that, the fact that America hates Black people, and it's shown in our governmental policies and in our laws and through our leadership. AB 931 was a law that was going to help police officers, was going to help us, the victims, the ones who are being murdered, like Desmond Phillips, so that these officers are held accountable for their use of excessive force, so that they would no longer be able to just shoot to kill because of fear, but rather by law have to go through alternative measures before they can result to the use of force. That particular law was written by Shirley Weber, a Sacramento Congress person, and it went through legislation. It went through the different houses, and unfortunately, it got shelved. Why did it get shelved? Because there are powers that be, like the police association unions, as well as other government officials that did not want to see that law get passed. They want to continue to shoot to kill. They want to continue to use racism, implicit bias, and other hate to drive their need to kill us off.
Kat brings up a good point too. The current penal code in California, it's number 196, and it's what DA Ramsey used to justify the killing of Desmond Phillips, and what the state attorney general said he could not go against because the officers said that they felt threatened, that they felt other people were being threatened, and that was kind of it. And the penal code itself actually says that if an officer is in discharge of any other legal duty, in other words, it doesn't matter what they're doing, they have the right to shoot you if they feel like that they're scared or whatever, and it's all subjective, of course. And this loophole has allowed all of these killings to go on unchallenged, because even with these videotapes of people being shot point blank by officers or running away, where there's no threat, all the officer has to do is say, well, I felt threatened. And of course, with implicit bias, we know that Americans, 80-something percent, 88%, I think, of Americans feel threatened by Black males anyhow, unbeknownst even to themselves. So this idea of placing the whether or not something is a justified kill based on somebody's subjective feeling of being threatened, when you add implicit bias into it, it means that these people these cops have carte blanche to kill as at will.
Absolutely. But doesn't the fact that within 3 seconds or so of them entering, Desmond was dead, does that show that there was no attempt to resolve this in a peaceful manner? And how have the police, if they've not been questioned as to the quickness in which Desmond's life was taken, What's been the response to the fact that there was no attempt to de-escalate?
Well, the response was this. The way the DA painted the picture to the public is that the tase did not actually affect Desmond. They did tase him. Everybody agrees on that. We all agree that he fell from the tase. The split comes from where he was standing when he fell. And the DA says he was standing by the front door when he fell. He dropped the knives. He scrambled, picked up what they thought was a knife, and ran at the police. And so they opened fire on him. If you saw the Phillips apartment, you would know that 6'1" Desmond could not have managed any of that, especially after having been tased. And he died probably 10 feet away from that location. So the story is shaky at best, and the physical evidence, I don't believe, supports it. But in this country and in this county in particular, the witness accounts by police officers are given the most weight in any of these discussions. What the police say happened is what the public believes and what the prosecutors believe. And of course, prosecutors and police work very closely together in this country. So they have an intimate relationship. So there's a lot about our system in general that goes into play when you're dealing with a police shooting like this.
I do remember that. I do realize that both you and Kat had a detailed agenda to try and work through in order to get this message across. And I just wanted to honor that as best as we could, while still trying to get out the basic information we needed for Desmond. So going back to some of the talking points that you guys wanted to raise, the police killings of citizens in Butte County, you said on the information you sent me, 12 in 5 years. Is that a good stat? I mean,
no, it's horrible.
No stat is a good stat, but 12 in 5 years, and that's
it's 2.5 times the state average. So it's 2.5 times the average of officer-involved fatalities in California, and California is ranked as one of the worst states in the country so that number is even more horrific when you realize that we're in a state already that has a great number of these killings. So no, our county is really, really high in the numbers, and it is really scary living in this county to realize that. I've researched a lot of it, and it's really sorry.
That's
Kat,
okay.
You're making noise. I can't. One thing I really want to talk about though is the autopsy report that I feel is really important, because it shows a lot of the duplicity or just the outright lying that DA Ramsey is doing in these cases. And so according to the autopsy report, there were 11 bullets that entered Desmond. And yet in his official report to the public and to the chief of police, Ramsey notes that there were 10. And his response when questioned on that by Kat and myself was 10 or 11, what does it matter? Desmond's still dead. That's what he said. And I quote that in public when asked about this situation. So his flippancy and his harassment and just outright lies are pretty awful. But it's really important to pay attention to the fact that he is lying for a purpose here. It isn't just simply that he's bad at math or that he can't read. There were 6 missed shots in the apartment. There were 6 shots that did not hit Desmond in the apartment. And they retrieved 16 shell casings from the apartment the night of the killing. So they found that there were 16 bullets missing from Ganabin and Fleer's guns. So 16 is the number they're going for, 6 missed shots. And so Ramsey had to make the 11 into a 10 to get 16. The problem with all that is it was 11, not 10. And then David Phillips found a shell casing under his sofa about 2 weeks after the shooting, and it was identified as one of Officer Ganabin's shell casings, which makes 17 shell casings found on the scene. Again, so the number of shots fired was 17. Ramsey accounts for 16. Fleer and Ganabin's guns were missing 16 bullets. So somebody else fired it in that room, and for whatever reason, they don't want him identified. There were possibilities are that Jared Cumber, who was holding the taser and shot the taser fire, he could have shot. He was already under investigation for a police killing that happened in 2013. So there's a possibility they didn't want to bring him into this. There were 2 other officers that entered in the back, and I don't know whether they had their guns drawn or not. They say not, so we don't know. But somebody else fired in there, and the DA of the county and the chief of police don't want us to know who it was. And that in itself, even if there was nothing else, that in itself speaks to a cover-up right there. And why are they? What are they trying to cover up? They're trying to cover up the fact that this was an execution, and they did a horrible, horrible thing, and they know it. They know it. The other thing the autopsy showed me was that all of the shots were in his upper body, neck, and face. 6 of them were at a moderately downward angle, which means that because he was 6'1", the cops were approximately 6 feet. A moderately downward angle would mean that probably on his knees. And then one shot was sharply downward. And if you don't mind me getting a little bit graphic, this is part of why David didn't want to stay on. The shot entered Desmond's face to the left of his nose. It exited his nostril, grazed his lip, and then entered his heart. That's how sharply downward that shot was. And that's the one that killed him almost instantly because his heart was penetrated. And that there's no way that shot, unless they had a helicopter in the apartment and they were flying right above him. I mean, there's just no way that happened while he was standing up and in any way threatening them. So these are the facts that Chico PD and the DA don't want people to know. It's just talk about overkill. It is really excessive, in excessive force standards.
Yeah.
And Desmond was definitely on the ground or falling during most of the shooting.
Did any of the officers have a body cam?
No, they weren't. Oh, that's a whole nother story. So they all had body cameras. Butte County, Chico PD has had body cameras. At that time, they'd had them for 2 years almost, and they hadn't activated the system, and they claimed that they were having issues with the company that they were going to be shooting the video up in the cloud somewhere. And so they hadn't resolved that, so they didn't have their cameras on. And that's very convenient. A week after Desmond's death, there was a big to-do in the newspaper. The police was like, yeah, we've got our body cameras on now, everything's fine. But at the time of the killing, and this is part of why the Attorney General said he couldn't find against the police, was because it was really the police's word against, according to him, and that penal code, it was the police's word against David's word, and we know how that goes. So no body cameras in this killing.
Wow. Did you want to add anything to that, Kat?
As far as the facts in regards to the case and the corruption and the cover-ups, we've seen it take place in several other officer-involved shootings. Desmond Phillips and David Phillips Desmond was a very loving person, and David Phillips is even more loving. And with the murder of Desmond Phillips, we have been able to connect other families that have also been involved in officer-involved shootings here in Butte County, and have been able to see parallels in the corruption and the cover-ups between the Desmond Phillips case as well as the other cases. There are currently, I believe, 4 cases right now that are pending lawsuits with against the city and Butte County for the unlawful murders of these individuals, including Brian Sharp, Myra Michelazio, Tyler Rushing, and Desmond Phillips. That says a lot, and these are all going on right now currently. There is a lot of racism in Butte County. This is an 80% white town with only 2% black population. And with that being said, with your police force being majority white, they attack all of those oppressed groups, blacks, homeless, those who appear to be homeless, those who appear to be mentally ill, those who appear to be suffering from a meth addiction or any other type of drug addiction. Those are the targeted populations by this white supremacy dominance culture we have in the policing of Butte County and under District Attorney Ramsey, who needs to go. Longest running district attorney in California, over 30 years.
Wow.
I would like to point out there that we had a write-in campaign this last election because Ramsey runs unopposed almost every time because from what I've heard, he actually threatens anybody who runs against him as the DA. He threatens to hurt their clients, you know, if they bring a case in front of him, that he'll prosecute to the fullest and things like that. So nobody wants to run against him, but we did a write-in campaign and we only put it out there on the social media for 2 weeks. We had 2,100 Desmond Phillips write-ins for DA, and the average in this, you know, for a situation like that, the most write-ins they had ever really had was like 70. So we had 2,100 people write Desmond Phillips' name in as DA to show you how much people in this county don't want DA Ramsey. It's you know, we're really trapped with this system that is incredibly corrupt. So and I think David touched on what they did with Desmond's body and how they played hide and seek with it. And I just wanted to add to that was a very purposeful thing. They didn't refrigerate the body properly. And so by the time the Phillips family had the body, they couldn't have a private autopsy done, even if they could have afforded it. So on an emotional level, it was torturous, but it also was very specific strategy on the DA's part, because all of the evidence that could have been gleaned from Desmond's body by an outside pathologist was ruined by not refrigerating the body properly and by keeping it from the family for that long. So what did they want to hide from the body? What evidence was on there? We don't know. David took some pictures when he finally did get the body, and one of them shows a quarter-sized piece of skin missing from Desmond's hip, and it appears like a wound that was something that was cut or ripped out, but it wasn't a bullet mark, and it was nowhere on the autopsy, so we don't know where that what that wound was from or why it wasn't marked on the autopsy. But those are questions that could have been possibly answered if the family had been able to get the body in a reasonable amount of time, and if the body had been taken care of. So beyond the disrespect and the torture of what the family, there is a very strategic move by the DA there to destroy evidence and to destroy the chain of evidence, because no one knew where the body was for 4 days except the DA.
Yeah.
So that's a break in the chain of evidence as well, which is also a violation. But nobody seems to care about that kind of stuff.
Ramsey, I take it, is the district attorney, right?
Yes, he's a district attorney. Yes.
So once you've unravelled the issue or the issues revolving around the autopsy report, then you have these additional lies that you.
Right.
Let's look at that. So the defense was built on Desmond not being fully tased because second prong did not stay in his body. Ramsey said he got caught in the thick waistband of his shorts.
Yes.
So
Ramsey's defense, his reason for justifying the kill was that Desmond jumped up from the tase and ran at the cops. And his way of getting around the fact that people don't jump up from tases very often was the fact that he claims that one of the prongs did not stick in Desmond's body, so it wasn't delivering the full charge. So the problem with this is that his claim was that the prong was caught in these gym shorts, these basketball shorts that Desmond was wearing, as well as the T-shirt and boxer shorts. But when you look at the CSI evidence from his own crime lab, the two prongs, one had T-shirt fiber, and one had T-shirt fiber and gray fiber from his boxer shorts, but it did not have any fiber that matched the athletic shorts. So Ramsey's point in all that is right off the bat is disregarded. You can't say it got stuck in the basketball shorts if there's no fiber from the shorts on the prong. There was Desmond's tissue was on the prong. There was blood all the way up to the base of the prong. There were two types of fiber that matched the T-shirt and the boxer shorts, but nothing from the athletic shorts. So the prong definitely went into Desmond. There also was no blood on the athletic shorts. Now, David said Desmond had taken his shorts off and was only in boxers and a T-shirt. The only blood was found on the front of the boxer shorts, and the T-shirt was covered in it. The athletic shorts he was supposedly wearing had no blood on them, and this is after he was shot 11 times. So that in itself is problematic also. The other thing is in the coroner's report, the RN, the registered nurse who took Desmond's body, when she was undressing him, she claims in her report that she took two taser prongs from the deceased's body. And it doesn't say one taser prong, and it doesn't say a taser prong was in his clothes. She took his clothes off, and then she writes that she took two taser prongs from the deceased's body. So the evidence is pretty much in the face of, calling out D.A. Ramsey as the liar he is. I don't know why the Attorney General didn't find that any of that was worthwhile, except that he does work in the criminal justice system, and there the blue line, as we call it over here, is pretty deep, and it's pretty scary stuff. Some other lies that Ramsey told about Desmond and Chief O'Brien also in the very first press conference that they had, Ramsey insinuates that Desmond was on drugs, and he insinuates that he was a criminal. And the chief of police, in answer to a question, says, yes, we do have a history with him. That's a quote. And so he's implying also that it's a criminal history. He doesn't clarify that the only history they had with him was the 5150s, which were mental health calls. And he lets it sit. The DA Ramsey also said Desmond had two knives in his possession when he charged at the police. There were no knives found next to his fallen body. The closest one was about 7 feet away. So that lie right there has followed this case. And anytime you talk to somebody in Chico who's pro-police, they'll tell you, well, he shouldn't have come at the police with two knives. And it's like, well, he didn't. And DA Ramsey has, he's taken that back and said it was a door jam, but the damage was done. In the press and in the community, Desmond was a knife-wielding person who attacked the police. DA Ramsey also said it was a chaotic knife and gunfight. You can't have a chaotic knife and gunfight in less than 5 seconds. And also, if you saw the apartment, there wasn't any room for that. So again, we have these exaggeration and dramatization, really extremely biased towards making the police look like they were being threatened by this, young man who was out of his mind and coming at them with a knife. There was not room for Desmond to do what Ramsey claimed he did. He said in different press conferences that he was coming at the police with a stabbing motion. He said he was windmilling his arms crazily with the knives. He said he was flailing with the knives in it. So he basically embellished it as he went. And none of it was true. He didn't have a knife. And even Ramsey had to admit that at finally. But the damage was done.
So
I would like to also add one thing before I leave Ramsey behind. We had an NAACP meeting here in Butte County 3 days after Desmond's death. And in that meeting, Ramsey's behavior was egregious. He basically told the witnesses that spoke that they were lying and that they didn't know what they were talking about. He told David Phillips that he did not see what Phillips was claiming he saw. He just outright called him a liar and said that he didn't see it. He threatened to play the 911 tape at the meeting, despite the fact that the Phillips family hadn't even heard it yet. And if you've listened to it, you know what's on there. He basically, one person from the audience actually stood up and said, actually two people did, but one said it best, that he was obviously had decided the case within 3 days and no investigation, because the way he was talking about it was vilifying Desmond and lifting the police up as heroes. And that was essentially his attitude the entire time. He's an incredibly insensitive and somewhat sadistic person, simply in his public. He does this in public too. That's the scary part. He doesn't even try and hide it.
Wow.
They're always steering the narrative. That's the problem that we have with police violence against blacks. We don't stand a chance. David said that as soon as Desmond was murdered and Ramsey started releasing reports, he had to backtrack on a lot of things that he was saying because they were not true. They were not well supported by the evidence. False narratives lead to biased decision-making. It leads to distrust from the community. It leads to a need for more police oversight. We really needed AB 931 to get passed because it really would have changed the way police officers are getting away with being able to just shoot to kill and not having any accountability for it.
That's a really good point, Kat, because if AB 931 had been the law, Desmond would be alive. It required the police to use all the alternative methods first before they opened fire. And there were 3 other ways they could have entered the apartment without confronting Desmond. There was de-escalation that could have taken place. They could have rescued the grandchildren and David out of the apartment. That was their reason, they said, for kicking in the door. They had to rescue these people. They could have got them out of the apartment through the windows without ever having to confront Desmond at all, and just let him play out his crisis. So there were all these alternatives that if AB 931 had been the law, would have had to be enacted prior to going in there with their guns drawn. And so that's why this law, they claim they're going to bring it back with the new state Senate. And, we'll see in 2019 whether that happens. That's what the promise is. But even so, they've watered it down somewhat because of the clout that the police and that law enforcement and prosecutors have in the state.
But their own policy suggests that a police officer should not open fire unless there is clear and imminent danger, right?
Right. Well, that's the claim. But the problem is that police always see imminent. So here's something that happened 2 days ago here in Chico. There was an 8-year-old boy who has developmental and some mental problems, disorders, and he was having an episode, and he left his school, and the principal and a teacher were following him, and he was basically freaking out, and this is an episode that he had, and they were following him closely. One of them mistakenly called the police. Also, Butte County Sheriff happened to be driving by, so Butte County Sheriff pulls over, and within seconds they are handcuffing an 8-year-old boy. They sat him down onto the sidewalk, took his shoes off, and handcuffed him and left him handcuffed. He's screaming, and they claim they did it because he was scratching at them when they tried to bear hug him, and that they didn't want him to run into the streets. And yet they left him handcuffed and terrorized for quite a bit of time. There's a video of it that lasts a few minutes, but it went on beyond that. And so this is the mentality that California and in the United States, police are scared of everybody. They always feel threatened if you listen to what they say. And this is an 8-year-old boy. And it's insane. You and there were 8 law enforcement officers there. and yet they felt the need to handcuff this child. I don't know how to explain that other than saying that they're just on such a power trip. And the scary part is there are people in the community right now who are defending the police because, despite all this, they're still defending them.
I think one thing to add to that, Erica, is the fact that because of Desmond's murder and the lawsuit that was filed, the city wanted to protect themselves and decided to hire mental health professionals that are supposed to be working with law enforcement and going out to these calls to make sure that there is no excessive force, that de-escalation is taking place, and that they are providing services instead of providing bullets into their skull. And yet, in the case of this 8-year-old, where were the mental health professionals at that time?
Yeah, they didn't call him. It's such a, the crazy thing about their wonderful pilot program, and wonderful is sarcastic, is that it only operates from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. During the day, when most mental health crises happen at night. So that in and of itself is pretty dumb. But they only have one person available at any given time. And nobody, it would appear, called the behavioral health people for this nonviolent and yet very upset child. So it's a good point, Kat, that they didn't even utilize what they say they are utilizing. They didn't even utilize it. They have things that they can do, and they choose not to do them. And that is apparent in Desmond's death, in Tyler Rushing's death. The situations are so blatantly in disregard for human life and for the trauma, in this case, of this little 8-year-old boy who already has a whole lot of weight on his shoulders to get through life with the disorders he has. And on top of that, he's now traumatized, deeply traumatized, I'm sure. And they don't care. This is our police department. They don't care, unfortunately.
I hear that. So just flicking through some of these lies, Ramsey claimed that after Desmond fell by the front door, Gang Nabin, hopefully if I pronounce his name right or wrong, I'm not really bothered, Gang Nabin and Flyer ran deep into the apartment, and he made and you emphasize that he makes a point of noting they ran under the taser wires because he thinks he's clever that way. Explain that one.
Yeah. So this is Ramsey's story that Jared Cumber stood in the doorway, tased Desmond, who they claim was standing right by the door, that Desmond fell, so the taser wires were extended, and that Ganabin and Fleer, in order to enter the apartment, had to run underneath the taser wires. So they had to be lifted up for them to run under them. They proceeded to run deeply into the apartment, away from Desmond, according to where they said Desmond had fallen. They ran away from him, and Ramsey's excuse was they were looking to see if he still had a knife before they approached him. And that's when he supposedly jumped up and stuff like that. So they trapped themselves deep in the apartment. And then, if the sofa is big and the apartment's small, and they couldn't have seen Desmond's body unless they climbed on the sofa. So that was a ridiculous statement. The other thing about that situation is that Jared Cumber, Ramsey says he couldn't re-tase Desmond because the taser had broken, and that Cumber stood there in the doorway fiddling with the taser. And if that's true, and what Ramsey said is true, then Desmond jumped up and ran within a foot of Jared Cumber, and Jared Cumber did nothing. Desmond didn't attack Jared Cumber, and Jared Cumber didn't try and stop Desmond. And then he ran past Jared Cumber, and Jared Cumber did not tackle Desmond from behind. So in essence, Jared Cumber is it's like the Keystone Cops. He supposedly is such a bumbling idiot that he stood in the doorway fiddling with his taser while the person he had just tased jumped up and ran right past him. The story itself is just ludicrous, and especially when you see the confines of that apartment. It doesn't make any sense. If Desmond had fallen where they say he fell, then they had every opportunity to immediately get on top of him and handcuff him and stop any threat they said they felt. And they chose not to. And then they had the opportunity to tackle him without using lethal force, and they chose not to do that too. So the choices that they made, even according to Ramsey's own story, the choices that they made were choices that show that they wanted to kill him. I can't imagine any other, I don't understand any other options myself.
Yeah, so when you look at how they responded and how they've tried to cover that up, because here's the thing, and we've said it on this show often enough. We understand that the police are stressed and they're only human and open to mistakes and all sorts of stuff. And we understand that in the hyped up atmosphere and white knuckle stress related issues that they may well have themselves in when they responded, and all the adrenaline that would go pumping into people as they were going into a situation. Taking all of that into consideration, right? People make mistakes and we understand that. Right, and if the police, having done what they did, was to turn around and say, "Well, look, we actually went in there too gun ho. We were too militarized. There was too many of us. Too many had their guns drawn. Too many were prepared to start shooting before de-escalating or resolving." If they had said all of that, David Phillips wouldn't feel any better, probably not. But at least he would be satisfied that they have acknowledged that they've made a mistake, in the hope that they would put something in place not to repeat it. But the fact that in all of these cases that we're witnessing, that we're seeing, that we're hearing about, there's a continual attempt to criminalize the individual that they've just killed in order for them to justify their shoot. Now that's where it starts to get really skewered and really, ridiculous to the extent where the rage and the fury starts to pour out of a community. Because obviously people in Chico, they knew Desmond, right? So when you're putting this story up on the TV or in the media that this guy was a drug dealer or he was armed and he was going to come at you, surely the those that knew him, those in the church and those around the church and those places where he went and he sang the gospel, and they'd be going like, are you talking about the same Desmond that we know?
Exactly. I actually said this at the city council the other day, but about a year after Desmond was killed, I have Justice for Desmond Phillips written on my back window of my car. And I was parked at the library, and a year after he was killed, I was walking to my car, and a young girl came up. She's probably around 12 years old, I'm guessing. And she asked me if I had known Desmond, and she pointed at my car. And I said, no, I hadn't had that honor, but I hear he was a wonderful guy. And she said, I knew him. I went to the same church he went to. And then she added, he used to help me with my math homework all the time. And we both got kind of teary at that point. And then she said, I'm glad someone remembers him. And I think that's, that is what you're talking about, where somebody who knew him personally, a young girl that he spent time with at church, helping her with her math homework. He didn't have to do that, but it changed her life, and it touched her life in a way she'll never forget. And so, yeah, the people who know him or knew him certainly say things, but the problem is that it's definitely a minority in this town. He had only lived here 9 months. And so, but in that 9 months, he touched so many lives. I mean, this young girl and everyone else at the church, he and his father fed the homeless at, downtown in the plaza every Sunday, which was Desmond's idea. So that community was familiar with him. So he touched a lot of lives in that 9 months in this town, as well as with his family.
Let's go to, I just wanted to go on to the funeral. No, we want to go on to the how the fiasco Because
the fiasco with the body.
Yeah, we've got about half an hour left, and we've still got so much left that I know you guys wanted to try and get as much of this out as possible. So I'm trying to flick through it to get to some of the key points.
Okay.
So unless anybody has anything else that they want to add around the issues of the lives of Ramsey, if we try and move on to the fiasco with Desmond's body, for example. Did you?
Kat, do you want to jump in here?
Well, it's a tactic, and it's been done by several police departments. It's done by Sacramento Police Department. It was done by Chico Police Department. There was an order for his body to be delivered to Brucey Funeral Home Services, and then all of a sudden it got sent to Ramsey Funeral Home Services and sent the family on a wild goose chase for several days. The whole idea of not releasing body camera footage, the whole idea of hiding bodies that have been murdered from their families, it's all tactics to keep breaking us down. The system is broken.
Mm-hmm. Well, so one of the things to clarify, because Butte County doesn't have an official coroner's office. We're one of those small counties where our coroner is our sheriff, and if you don't think that's a conflict of interest,
I don't know what is.
The coroner is like the office that decides whether or not it was a homicide, suicide, or accident, and that's where the body's supposed to go immediately before the autopsy. And
the coroner, so the coroner is one and the same as
the sheriff. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So in a police shooting, for instance, the sheriff in this county is the one who decides whether it was homicide or accident or suicide. So there's a big problem with that already. But they don't have an actual autopsy room and refrigerators. They're reliant on the funeral homes. And so the protocol in this county is that the bodies are to be sent immediately to the nearest funeral home. And there's a rotation here in Chico because we have 3 or 4 funeral homes. So the night of Desmond's death, Brucey Funeral Home was supposed to be, they were up on the rotation. They were supposed to get Desmond's body. Bidwell Chapel was another funeral home. They were doing the transporting. This is what the coroner's report states. This is what the hospital report states, that the body was going to go to Brucey via Bidwell Chapel. So both the deputy coroner and the hospital, when they released the body, were under the presumption it was going to Brucey. Now, en route to Brucey Funeral Home here in Chico, the driver was told via radio to take, by the DA's office, to take the body to Oroville, and to Ramsey Funeral Home in Oroville, which is 30 minutes away from Chico. So the closest funeral home was about 3 minutes from the hospital, and they chose to take him 30 minutes. And the thing is, that happens with every body that's a victim of officer-involved shooting in this county, it turns out. So he has Desmond's body sent to the Oroville funeral home, where he has these deep connections, and then it takes 4 days before they bother to autopsy Desmond. And they don't give any reason for the delay. The next thing that we found out is that when the funeral home in Sacramento got the body at the end of a week, he had skin slippage. They used the term leaking. He had not been properly refrigerated. And so we don't, again, it's a destruction of evidence. But what happened in that week, the torture that the Phillips family was given, so they told the family Desmond was at Brucey. The family goes to Brucey. He's not there. They call again. They're told, oh, well, he must be at Bidwell Chapel. They go to Bidwell Chapel. He's not there. Finally, they admit that he's down in Oroville. The Phillips family attorney, John Burris, is allowed to view the body, but this is 5 days after the killing. That's a Wednesday. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the Phillips family is sent back and forth between funeral homes in their attempt to view Desmond's body. They wanted to say their goodbyes. and they were not allowed to for over a week. And they literally went into these funeral homes expecting to say goodbye to their son and their brother, and then they were told he's not here. And so the DA's office was the one giving the Phillips family this misinformation. On the day that they finally released the body, the DA's office told the funeral home from Sacramento to pick his body up for burial at one of the funeral homes in town. And when they got there, they found out he wasn't there. He was at the other one. So even after they released the body, they sent, and this is from the DA's office, they sent the funeral home that was there to pick up the body for burial to the wrong local funeral home before they finally got to the right one. So they played hide and seek with Desmond's body to keep the family from being able to see him. And as Kat said, it's definitely a technique.
So I mean, it goes just a lot deeper than just a straightforward wrong shoot, wrong kill, badly handled situation, criminalizing the victim and traumatizing the family all over again, to a whole conspiracy where now they're trying to play hide and seek with the body, delaying the autopsy, so therefore compromising the results, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean it's pretty. By the time that the pathologist had seen the body, so the CSI reporter said that she had matched, or investigator rather, said she had matched some holes in the T-shirt to red marks that appeared to be taser marks on Desmond's chest. But the pathologist, by the time he saw it, he specifically notes in the autopsy, which was sort of odd anyway, that there was no sign of 2 taser prongs hitting Desmond's body anywhere on the body. And so I don't know why he thought to add that, except that he was being coached. But usually the autopsy doesn't say what isn't there. They just say what is there. However, whatever marks the CSI investigator that they had seen earlier at the time of the autopsy had faded. I think obviously with his blood draining and body.
Yeah, I was just...
we're able to hide evidence.
Wow. So...
Yeah, I know. It's
something that starts happening about a week after. So Desmond's sister both stated they could smell decay on Desmond even after he was embalmed, and that he was leaking.
Yes. Yeah, when they viewed his body in the coffin before the funeral, that's what they said, that they could smell decay, and that they felt that they could tell his body was kind of seeping or leaking. And this is after it was embalmed. So yeah, it was quite far along in decomposition at that point, which wouldn't happen if it had been refrigerated. That doesn't happen. I mean, no, it's pretty easy to look this stuff up on the internet and find out what a body's supposed to look like and smell like after a week of refrigeration versus a week of sitting out.
So okay, so it was 4 days, and no private autopsy was possible after the family finally received the body. Why weren't they able to do a private autopsy?
Well, there's 2 reasons. One is that, of course, they don't have that kind of money. Okay. But the other thing is that the evidence, when you have a body that's that decomposed, an autopsy isn't really going to do anything.
Which is the point I made earlier about the results being compromised.
Yeah, exactly. The evidence itself is gone, both from the previous autopsy and from the decay of the body. So the only thing, really that you could do at that point would get a forensic person in there, I suppose, to look at bones and stuff like that. But I mean, the body was not in any position to give any real evidence, because we're talking about some pretty little, where the tasers hit and that kind of thing. That's what we're talking about, and they're not great big glaring wounds. So you needed to have.
Here's the thing. While we're talking about the the wheres and why-fors of the taser. We're missing out on a conversation we should be having about the 16 shots that was fired into an unarmed victim's body. And people are getting so caught up in the cosmetics and the conspiracy that the truth continues to be hidden. We need to talk more about the 16 shots, why it needed 16 shots to put an individual down. He wasn't under the influence. It wasn't like he was a meth head and he was totally consumed with drugs and alcohol. He wasn't so huge and ginormous in size that there was going to be a difficulty in.
And in under 5 seconds, they didn't have time to really discern whether he was a threat or not. They saw a tall black man and fired away. So they basically are trained to, if not empty their guns, to at least continue to shoot and continue to shoot. The other thing is that they use semi-automatic weapons, so they don't have to re-pull the trigger over and over and over again, right? It's semi-automatic, and it's just a light release and clenching. It's not a full cocking of the weapon and that kind of thing. So they're able to fire off a lot more bullets in a smaller amount of time. And according to the DA, there's some study he quoted that it takes your brain a couple seconds to stop a behavior. So once the threat that they had perceived had stopped, they were going to fire 2 or 3 more rounds anyway. But that doesn't account for why so many, if not all of the bullets were aimed downward. And it doesn't, it's about policing in America. They are told to shoot until essentially the person is dead. It's why they handcuffed him. Okay, he was basically dead, and before they tried CPR, they handcuffed him. Right, because that the whole threat thing, they had to play up that threat. So nobody, they don't do 1 or 2 shots around here. That's not how they do it.
16 shots is excessive. It's definitely not reasonable, and it was not necessary. And yes, Erica, every time these officers are going to use their gun, they are dropping bullets left and right. There is no 1 or 2 shots being fired. I want people to know that Justice for Desmond is still fighting for justice for Desmond. We are showing up to city council meetings, putting pressure on city council, letting them know what our community needs in order to make us safer and in order to protect us. We are still having Dinner for Desmond, as well as our upcoming event in November, where we want people to remember to get out and vote. We have 3 city council seats available. We want people to make sure that they are voting for those who are going to keep us safe. I want people to know that we have a Facebook page, Justice for Desmond Phillips, on Facebook, as well as an email address, justicefordesmondphillips@gmail.com. Please visit the Facebook page, like it, and follow it to stay up to date with everything that has taken place with Justice for Desmond.
We also have a Twitter account that everything we put on the Facebook page is sent immediately to Twitter as well. So if you don't have Facebook, you can still follow using Twitter if you have a Twitter account. And
we normally start trying to round up the show roundabout now and get in the final comments. But I'm not going to do that just yet. We've got about 12 minutes left, but I think it's absolutely imperative that we just go through this last patch of notes that you guys had prepared, because this is not the first time that we're witnessing it. The family of Kendrick Johnson, who was killed by who we believe to be the sons of 2 FBI officers. I don't know if you know the Kendrick Johnson story, but Kendrick Johnson was another young man who was killed by 2 boys, and they were actually turned out to be the sons of an FBI agent. But what you're talking about here in this last segment is vitally important, because the harassment of people who lose loved ones to trigger happy cops has also become commonplace, of having to fight the harassment. Talk to me about the harassment. Followed, who was it? Because it says the harassment.
Okay, They started by parking outside of David Phillips' apartment in the evenings. They would have no reason to park there. They would just sit in the parking lot or on the street right outside his apartment with their lights going and just sit there. They weren't doing anything.
But you'd ask yourself, why would you do that? The man's just lost his son. He wasn't the threat.
Exactly.
The person that you thought was the threat, you've already taken out. Why would you do that?
That's a good question. They followed David in his car a few times. They follow. So this is an interesting story. Desmond's sister Aquila, she left her apartment and she drove to a store. She went inside the store and she came back out and drove home. And the entire time she was accompanied by Chico police. They followed her from her apartment to the store. They waited outside the store for her, and then they followed her home again. She hadn't done anything. They just were harassing her. And there's a video on our Facebook page that shows, it's a live video that David took. They had surrounded him. He went to a pizza place to pick up pizza to feed the homeless on a Sunday, and they surrounded him. There were 8 cops there. They did an illegal search on him, for one thing. They impounded his car, which they said they had reason to do. The whole thing was, their excuse was that he was driving without a license, but they had 8 armed cops literally in a circle around him. And it's all on the videotape. You can see how they treat him, how they talk to him. And those are just the most egregious examples of what this family goes through. When the Attorney General said he wasn't going to press charges, Aquila said to me, "How am I supposed to live in that town? I'm scared." And she has good reason to be. When you're followed like she was followed by the people that are supposedly there to protect and serve, it is scary. And the other thing I want to add really quick is that they're being harassed by civilians as well. There's a very strong pro-police community in this town and in this county, and they say some of the most vile things. They troll the video, the live video. They troll the websites. Anytime there's a newspaper article, they get on there in the comments and make horrific responses. Social media is covered with the stuff that they say. Luckily, David and the family choose not to read them, but they're horrific. And so the community is in on this harassment as well. They say some really horrible things. So, yeah.
And just finally, we never did get to hear, or we couldn't hear the 911 call on the show. But talk us through it as you recall the 911 call. What did it entail?
So the 911 call, there are 3 separate calls. The first one, David calls and he says to the dispatcher, I need assistance, or I need help. My son is having one of his episodes. He's mental, or he's having a mental episode, something like that. And the dispatcher says, is it a seizure? Because he had been misdiagnosed as seizure disorder. So she asked if it's a seizure, and he says, yeah, whatever, he's having an episode. So already she's laying the foundation for the first responders to not be prepared for somebody who is in a psychotic episode.
Right.
So when they got there, the first responders were not prepared for somebody who was completely in a trance.
Yeah.
And everything unfolded from that point. He did call back, as he stated, he called back a second time and he told them, Desmond has a knife. Just so you know, when you come in, blah, blah, blah. And he specifically told her that he and the grandchildren were locked away safely. She says, can you get out? He says, no, but we're locked in the bedrooms behind closed doors. We don't know. We don't have the dispatch recording, so we don't know what she says to the cops about that. David also tells her that Desmond is no longer in the hallway trying to get in the room, that he's left, and it sounds like Desmond's de-escalating. David doesn't use those words, but there is a really scary part where Desmond's kicking the door and David's yelling. David's obviously frightened for his son and by his son, because Desmond is very worked up in his panic about the police coming, and so then she tells David to calm down. The next thing, David doesn't hang up on this this time. This is the third call, and he doesn't hang up. And right after that, you hear the door get kicked in, and then you hear go, 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 and a sound of like a squeal, a scream squeal of Desmond being tased. And then in under 5 seconds, you hear gunfire opening. And David is as soon as the tase scream happens, he goes out into the hallway, and you can tell her, you can hear her saying, stay where you are, don't go out there. And you hear him screaming, you're murdering my baby. Why have you shot my baby? You've killed my baby. You've murdered my baby. And he, of course, is in tears, collapsed. He tried to crawl to Desmond's body, and they pulled him back. They wouldn't let him near. And then you can actually hear them kind of semi-harassing him right then and there. I'm laughing, and I shouldn't be. It's horrible. But he wants his phone that he dropped, and they're like, yeah, just get away from the body. And they treat him pretty badly right off the bat. It's heartbreaking, and I would really recommend that if anyone listens to it is on YouTube, but be prepared to have your heart broken.
Do you know, I've read a lot of the information that you've sent me. I've been on the internet, and I've looked at some of the. I've seen the 911 call. It is absolutely heartbreaking, and I can totally understand why David finds it very difficult reliving this through interviews and other things. And so
I would like to add, can I add one last thing really quickly before we run out of time? The DA and the citizens of Chico and a lot of people on the internet try to blame David for what happened. And he has taken that into himself a little bit, and he fights it, but he does sometimes think that maybe he was responsible for the death of his son because of what they've said. And it has to be made really clear that he called for help, and the help was not there. They killed his son instead. He did what any father would do. He called for help, but people have blamed him for it. You shouldn't have called the police. You know, it's ludicrous the lengths people will go to defend police in this country. It is quite revolting to me.
No, you're quite right. David called for help. He didn't ask for his son to be executed or killed. And even if he was scared at the time as to what his son might do, right? I don't think he knew his son, and he knows that what his son needed was help and a medication to get it back under control, and it would have been okay. Suffice to say, I have a family member, in fact, my younger brother, who has suffered with mental health for over 30 years. And it's by God's grace that we would not have to deal with losing him the way that you lose your loved ones in America who suffer with mental health. I thank God that every incident or every issue that we've ever had with him, it's been a case of we've been able to resolve it amongst ourselves, because we are better equipped here in the UK for dealing with mental health. Training and awareness for mental health is commonplace here in the UK, and there's not many jobs that you can go and work at that you are not made aware of mental health or how to respond to issues relating to mental health. And I can't understand for the life of me why the most important service in the whole nation, the police who are there to protect and serve, have so little knowledge, awareness, or ability to cope with something that everybody else is dealing with daily. Yeah. We are having to de-escalate with our loved ones daily. Sometimes it does get too much. Sometimes we do have to call for help and support. But most of the time, we are dealing with it ourselves daily. And every time they show up with their chariots of death, another one bites the dust. And I cannot understand for the life of me why they have not yet put something in place to train, educate, make aware, or bring alongside those that can de-escalate, communicate, touch base. You know, we dealt with a case last week with Captain Brian Babb. I had his sister, Stephanie Babb, on the show. And they were talking about he was on the phone with his counselor.
Right.
He was on the phone with his counselor, who was prepared to come there, and they told her no. Rather, they went in there and shot him dead. The one person that could have probably connected with him and reached out to him is the
Right.
one that they stopped from being there. But at this
Exactly.
point, I'd like to say that we've actually run out of time. I'd like to
Yes.
thank you, Kat and David, for being on the show. I'm really hoping that we've managed to get this message across. I do think that we may well have to revisit this issue again in a couple of months or so, because I'd love to find out how far you got, where you're going, and what other help and support we can give. Very quickly, as we have run out of time, is there any links, sites, email addresses that you want to give out now, contact information that you want to point people in the direction of?
Right. Facebook is Justice for Desmond Phillips. Twitter is Justice for Desmond Phillips, and they're linked. And then we have an Instagram, but we don't keep it up all that well. It's Justice for Desmond. And then we do have a Gmail account, email account. It's justicefordesmond@gmail.com. So if you want to shoot us an email about something, you can reach us there.
Well, on that note, Kat, I know you've disappeared for a while. I did try to get you back into the call, but you was obviously was away from your station. She's gone again. But yes, Erica, I want to thank you, and if you can thank everybody else that's now no longer on the call for their contribution to what I believe is going to be a very informative show. Thank you guys very much, and
Thank you, Kervin.
we are rooting for Justice for Desmond Phillips and the Justice for Desmond Phillips team.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Okay, you guys take care. God bless.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I already did my time. I paid for my crime. I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Next week I'm back with Scott Rushing, and we're talking about the death of Tyler Rushing
I already did.
from the same town, from the same place,
I already did my time. I paid for my crime.
in the same circumstance.
Did my time.
Join me next week for another Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. Until then, I'm out of here. We've run out of time.
Back in the day, I didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die, was 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 die.